YouTube. Today we're going to talk about 3 cards that I've had some evolving ideas about, but was then particularly influenced by reading the guidebook for this deck, the Herbcrafter's Tarot, which I will do a review of at some point. I really love this deck, but it got me thinking a little differently about some cards, and so I wanted to share how the interpretations in this guidebook kind of mesh with my own initial impressions. So I'm going to start with, I'll start with 2 cards, the 7 and the Knight of Wands. So both of these cards, to me, had a strong, when I first learned about them, and still have a strong feeling of connection to trans folks finding our identities, finding our gender identities. So the 7 of Wands, and both of these cards, by the way, I'll talk about other interpretations and like in more full in my tarot study series, but I'm going to kind of focus on something that I noticed about both of them. So the 7 of Wands, when I first met this card, I was very drawn to the idea of how the figure in the 7 of Wands could be a trans person who is potentially early on, or not even early on, but just somebody whose gender identity does not fit what normative society would accept. So you've got these, wands here, and typically, they can be seen as kind of mainstream thought or others who disagree with you. And particularly that resonated with me as a trans person, as a non-binary trans person, and as somebody who doesn't have like a legible gender identity. So somebody looks at me, they're not going to get my gender identity through looking. Not that you can do that with anybody, but like because I tend to present kind of on the femme side of the spectrum, maybe not like super high femme, but people would assume that my identity is female, and it's not. And so I've often felt this kind of energy of like resistance, or having to kind of stand with my wand in resistance against what everyone else would assume. And even when people are saying, oh, well, if you're non-binary, you should be more androgynous, you should do this, you should do that, and having to say like, no, I am myself. And so there's a lot of this, I think, can be a lot of this for trans folks. And then the Knight of Wands, because I think of this card as being very about like being in your unique self. I think it was Lindsay Mack in the Core Cards course that I first took with her, talked about the experience of like when you meet somebody, and it's not that they're like particularly attractive or particularly anything, but they have something about them that they're just so like firm in who they are, and they know who they are so well that they just kind of shine. And I immediately knew what that was, and I was thinking about how that can be true. There are a lot of folks I know who have a kind of very like non-normative gender identity, but just 100% know who they are and exude that when they walk into a room. And even though they may not be, conventionally attractive or like what people expect, people are just naturally like drawn to them, magnetized to them. So these 2 cards for me have that kind of trans association. And then I started connecting these cards, though, to something different, or something related but different, through the Herbcrafter's tarot, and specifically connecting them to ancestry and the idea of Transcestors. And you may have heard this. I know, like I think it's called Broken Bones, is a podcast that talks about this. I'm hearing it more and more, the concept of Transcestors as being people who are not related by blood but are also trans. So like your people who came before you, the elders in your community. And so I'm going to read actually from the guidebook, and I'll show you the cards So we'll start with the 7. This is the 7 of fire in this deck. It is cinnamon. Give you a chance to look at that image. Actually, I may be able to hold and read. So the 7 of fire and the Herbcrafters. There it is. Okay, so this is what the guidebook says. Answer the call of the ancients. Seek vision from ancestors. Take a stand from your whole authentic self. An image of the goddess Ishel, and pardon, I don't know how to pronounce Mayan words, so I may have butchered that, but I think you know what I mean. An image of the goddess Ishel and a sunstone are gathered on a table. A rosary is draped across a dusty book of curanderismo, healing arts, near a roaring fire. Cinnamon has been crushed for té de canela, cinnamon tea, and now boils on the wood stove. A jar of cinnamon sticks remains open, and a lime is sliced. Ancestral traditions remind us who we are. Té de canela is a remedy of Mexican grandmothers. Your personal power has roots in your own cultural heritage. When you hear a call from the ancients, start with a study of your bloodlines. Learn the history, take the medicine, and eat the food of your people. As cinnamon found its way around the globe on the Silk Road, allow yourself to be taken on a journey by your ancestors. Devotion to divine beings will deepen your connection. Collect imagery and stories, make altars and offerings, take pride in where you came from. Stand up for who you are. Claim your sovereign path. Your foremothers will give you direction. Cinnamon is a strong and spicy remedy. Be assertive and bold in the expression of true self. So I love the way this interpretation melds that feeling of standing up for yourself, being assertive and bold in expression of true self, which feels to me very aligned with my sort of trans interpretation, with the idea of ancestors or lineage. And so when I see things like, learning the history, when I see things like claiming your sovereign path, taking pride in where you came from, I think this obviously can also relate to bloodlines and may for many people be both combined, but I think it can also for trans folks and even just queer folks in general, knowing our history is so important, knowing that nothing just like rose out of, it wasn't like queerness rose out of Stonewall or something. Our history goes back way back, and so knowing that history, being connected to that history, whatever it is for you, as a like white trans person, have different lineage and Transcestors than a black or native person might, but finding that connection is a cool thread. And then related to it, the knights in this one are called the Adelitas. So the Adelita of fire is Cayenne. Dare to take a risk, be bold, defend the integrity of the grandmother's teachings. Heat erupts, then heals. A young woman makes a spicy vinegar called fire cider. She gathers ingredients: garlic, onion, horseradish, ginger, rosemary, thyme, cayenne, and vinegar. She grips the side of a molcajete with one hand while crushing peppers with the other. Golden winter sun casts a divine glow on her workspace. The Adelita of fire fiercely defends her passion and her rights. Like the warm, stimulating medicine of cayenne pepper, she is bold and relentless in her advocacy. She vows to protect folk traditions. She knows that access to this ancient remedy may be threatened. She is determined to honor the ancestors by keeping the people's medicine available to all. She is inspired by countless teachers who have freely shared information with her as she has learned about herbal medicine. She fights for the integrity of the community by passing on what has been given to her. She inspires others to follow her lead. So, again, there's this strong connection between advocacy, being bold, protection. I like there's like this connection between the 7 and the Knight, because you have, for the Adelita, because you have this like like defensiveness, but not in a bad way. Just like being firm, setting boundaries, defending your kind of unique position comes up here as well. And also I love the determined to honor the ancestors by keeping the people's medicine available to all. So I think that there's a cool kind of like communal folk feeling to how passing down an understanding of gender that is beyond what some forces might try to say, oh, it's two genders, that we know that's ridiculous, and so passing that down through the lines is really cool. So I really like this focus on ancestry because I think like it's important to know that like queer and trans people of course can reproduce, but a lot of us don't. So those of us who don't, that we still have lineage, like even if we don't have children in a bloodline, that we can still be ancestors, we could be transcestors to younger trans people. And in general, I think there's a value to this of thinking about community lineage rather than just thinking about bloodlines, because like, yes, I want to acknowledge that family lines, ancestral stuff is important, it can be important, but it's not the only thing. And I think it is, I didn't connect as much to, as a person who is child free, and then for other reasons, like I think it feels like my bloodlines are going to stop at me, but that's not true. It keeps cycling, it keeps going. And I think it's really important to think about our elders, our ancestors, the fact that where we are today, we're standing on the backs of giants in the trans community. And then to like carry that down, and particularly thinking about the idea of being an ancestor, I also want to bring in the 10, where is it? The 10 of Pentacles. So this card, I think, I mean, this is one version of it. I like that I like the dogs right there. So it's not, and we've got plant friends. It's not just human family, but it is still the traditional-ish version. You've got family of different generations represented, and I didn't relate to this card for a long time because, you know, I'm not going to be a technical ancestor. I'm not going to have a legacy in that way, but I think you can relate to this card as a future transcestor, as a future queer ancestor, or even like as a mentor, other ways of passing things down through your magic, so that if you're a child free, that doesn't mean that you're blocked from having this something to pass down. And I think it's important to fight against the idea that being child free means that you're a narcissist, or you're selfish, or, you know, you're disconnected. But sometimes I could feel that way, and so this family image felt kind of like, especially the generational family image, I need to find another way to connect to that. So I think that it is important that we seed different models of ancestry and the 10 of Pentacles energy. Also, by the way, you know, if you have had an abusive family, if you are adopted, if you don't know your own line, being able to connect to other kinds of ancestry, being able to heal that is important. I think the key word for this card is often legacy, and for me, legacy was like a hard word. It always just felt like the domain of a bunch of rich white guys, to be honest, because, you know, the idea of legacy being like passing down money, it's very capitalist, very property oriented, passing down money, passing down property. Like the people who really care about their family trees historically are often those who had inheritance to pass down, those who had like royal titles in Europe to pass down. And so I think we have to do some active work to reclaim the idea of legacy. You know, in the past, beyond it just being rich white people, is also like only certain children, quote unquote, counted, you know, the idea of like the firstborn son or whatever. So it's both gender and like birth order mattered. Non-biological family ties didn't matter to that kind of thinking. Of course, like enslaved people didn't get to have a lineage because the records weren't written down in that way. And also just like poor folks in general probably didn't have their records. So the idea of having like a specific line that you can trace that's written down, of course everyone can access their ancestry in other ways, but this specific idea felt very narrow to me, very white, very upper class, and just not very accessible. And so I want to be able to connect to legacy and the idea of passing things down in a different way. And so I'm going to read now from the Herbcrafters again. This is the 10 of Earth in this deck. 10 of Earth. And this is Horsetail. So here it is. Ancient magic, modern medicine. Find strength deep within. The wisdom of the elders takes root in the bones of youth. A basket decorated with horsetail root rests on a bridge above a dense marsh. Alder trees lean in to create a canopy above. The lush blanket of green covers the muddy earth beneath. The young spring shoots of horsetail are perfect for gathering. You are safe and secure. You are a well-established member of your community. Know your work supports and sustains others. Horsetail both gathers nutrients and removes toxins from the area. Understand your connection to the greater purpose of life. Pause and connect often with all that you have been given. Horsetail is a relative of a 400 million-year-old plant. You come from ancestral giants. This has all taken place before. Sometimes in order to be effective, you'd learn to grow small and multiply. Nourish an underground network. Mindfully gather from resources that have carried generations. Horsetail is favored among biodynamic gardeners as a natural fertilizer. The future can build on the strengths of the past. So I think that is a very different, to me, idea of legacy. Doesn't even specifically mention family, but it's this idea of, even if you don't know anything about your ancestors, there's an ancient tradition, whether it's through bloodlines or whether it's through culture or community, that you stand on the shoulders of giants. I love that it brings in safety and security, which is something that a lot of us don't feel in this, you know, in the initial or this version of the card. I mean, this version is actually not that bad, but the Smith Rider-Waite. And I like the idea of gathering nutrients and removing toxins, because I think that's part of, like, especially for white folks, obviously, like, there's a lot of toxicity in our bloodlines, but there's also something about that healing if you don't have connection to family. The idea of, like, well ancestors, and even within, like, Transcestors or community ancestors, of course, there are going to be people who, you know, there's going to be hurt in every line, there's going to be harm in every line, but it has this feeling to me of agency, of recycling and constantly composting, and like, this has been done before, but we always make it a little bit different every time. I also really like this idea of nourishing an underground network and growing small and multiplying, because I think another thing that the legacy idea can feel inaccessible is if, like me, you know, I struggle with the, like, idea of being narcissistic or selfish, but part of it is that I don't always have the spoons to do big community connection, or to, like, I don't think I'll ever, you know, I won't have children, but I also won't ever probably foster a child or, like, be, like, a big time commitment kind of mentor to somebody. But knowing that the little contributions that you can make you no less of a future ancestor than the big ones. If you're not familiar with Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy, you need to read that book. It is so good, and it really connects to how activism and advocacy and change can happen in tiny ways that spread and that multiply and that affect. And I think that that is a great way of connecting, as this book does. Like, advocacy with ancestry and community and how all these things kind of go together. And so it's both being really strong and unique in yourself, drawing from the people you came before, and feeling the support of that community underneath you, so that it's not just people to defend, but there's also you're being lifted up by community. So it's being strong and unique in yourself in the present right now, and then it's also being a future ancestor and what you might contribute, which can happen in these little ways that you kind of sprinkle around. And I think that's really beautiful. So those are my top thoughts. Please leave a comment below if you want to engage with this, if you have thoughts about these cards yourself. And don't forget to subscribe. I will do a review in the future of the Herbcrafters deck, and we're going to have more, I didn't do it at the beginning, but tarot topics in the future. So there you go.